The ballroom fell silent the moment Duke Adrian Blackmore turned his back on the most beautiful woman in London and asked the forgotten sister to dance instead. Every eye in that glittering hall watched as Eleanor Whitmore, the girl they'd spent years pretending not to see, stepped into the arms of the most dangerous man in England. Her family went pale. Her sister's smile cracked like porcelain. And Eleanor? She knew right then her life would never be safe again. What happens when the invisible daughter becomes impossible to ignore? When a man feared by Parliament itself decides she's the only woman worth risking everything for? Stay with me until the end. I promise you've never heard a story quite like this one. And when it's over, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels across the world. The library smelled like old leather and broken promises. Eleanor Whitmore sat curled in the window seat, her book abandoned in her lap, watching carriages pull up to the house across the square. Another party, another night of watching London's elite parade passed while she remained exactly where she'd always been, on the margins, looking in. Eleanor, Eleanor, where are you hiding? Which? Her mother's voice cut through the quiet like a blade through silk. Eleanor didn't move. Experience had taught her that sometimes stillness was the only defense she had. There you are. Lady Catherine Whitmore swept into the library, her skirts rustling with the kind of urgency that meant trouble. Put that dreadful book away. We're going out. Eleanor blinked. I'm sorry? Don't just sit there gaping. The Ashford ball is tonight, and you're coming whether you like it or not. This was new. Usually, Eleanor's presence at social functions was barely tolerated, a necessary inconvenience like bringing an umbrella to a garden party. She attended because refusing would cause talk, but no one actually wanted her there. Rosalind caught a chill, her mother continued, already moving toward the door. Nothing serious, but the physician insists she rest. I can hardly attend without a daughter, can I? People would think something was wrong. There it was. Eleanor was a replacement, a substitute for the daughter who actually mattered. I'll need time to dress, Eleanor said quietly. Half an hour. And for heaven's sake, try to look presentable. When her mother left, Eleanor remained in the window seat for 3 long breaths. Then she stood, smoothed her skirts, and walked upstairs to prepare for another evening of being invisible. Her maid, Susan, was waiting with a dress already laid out, one of Rosalind's cast-offs, altered to fit Eleanor's taller, less fashionable frame. The color was wrong for her. The style was 2 seasons old, but it was better than most of what hung in her wardrobe. You look lovely, Miss Eleanor, Susan said, though her eyes told a different story. You're a terrible liar, Susan, but I appreciate the effort. The Ashford ball was everything Eleanor expected and nothing she wanted. The ballroom blazed with candlelight, reflecting off mirrors and jewels until the whole space seemed to shimmer like something out of a fairy tale. Music swirled through air heavy with perfume and ambition. Eleanor took her position along the wall with the other forgotten daughters and aging spinsters. From here, she could observe without being observed, her favorite vantage point. Her mother immediately disappeared into a cluster of fashionable matrons, already spreading the story of Rosalind's unfortunate but temporary indisposition. Eleanor caught fragments of conversation. Such a beauty, that youngest Whitmore girl. Shame about the eldest, really. Adequate intelligence, I suppose, but in a woman. She'd heard it all before. The words didn't sting anymore, or maybe she'd just gotten better at pretending they didn't. Miss Whitmore. Eleanor turned to find Thomas Pemberton bowing beside her. Thomas was the youngest son of a minor baron, pleasant, harmless, and desperately seeking a wife with a decent dowry. He'd danced with her twice before, both times when no other partners were available. Mr. Pemberton, good evening. Might I have the honor of this dance? It wasn't really a question. Eleanor could see his mother watching from across the room, nodding approvingly. The Pembertons weren't in a position to be particular. Of course. Thomas was an adequate dancer, though he had a tendency to talk throughout. Tonight's topic was his recent investment in a coal mining venture, which he described in excruciating detail while Eleanor made appropriate noises and counted the measures until the music ended. When he finally returned her to her position along the wall, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of another social obligation fulfilled. She was about to excuse herself to find some refreshment when the room's energy shifted. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Even the musicians seemed to lose their rhythm for half a measure before recovering. Duke Adrian Blackmore had arrived. Eleanor had never seen him before, but she knew who he was immediately. Everyone knew who he was. The Duke of Blackmore was a legend, wealthy beyond measure, politically powerful, and feared in ways that polite society didn't discuss openly. He'd inherited his title at 19 after his father's unexpected death. At 21, he'd married a duke's daughter in what was called the social event of the decade. At 23, he'd buried her. That was 7 years ago. Since then, he'd been London's most eligible and most dangerous bachelor. Mothers pushed their daughters at him with desperate ambition. The daughters themselves either swooned or trembled, often both. But the Duke remained untouchable, attending only the most important social functions and leaving early, never dancing, rarely speaking to anyone outside his immediate circle. Until tonight, he moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water, tall, dark-haired, with features too sharp to be conventionally handsome but too compelling to look away from. His evening clothes were perfectly tailored, his posture military straight, but it was his eyes that caught Eleanor's attention. They were the color of winter storms, and they held no warmth whatsoever. Lady Ashford practically threw herself in his path. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure! We're so honored!" "Where is she?" Lady Ashford blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The Whitmore girl. I was told she'd be here tonight." Eleanor's stomach dropped. He meant Rosalind. Of course he did. Everyone always meant Rosalind. "Oh, Miss Rosalind is indisposed this evening, I'm afraid." A slight chill, nothing serious, but not that one. The Duke's gaze swept the room with the precision of a predator selecting prey. The other one. Eleanor. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her. Her mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Lady Ashford's mouth actually fell open. And the Duke was walking directly toward her. Eleanor's first instinct was to run. Her second was to look behind her to see who he was actually approaching. But there was no one there. Just the wall, and her, and the impossible reality of Duke Adrian Blackmore stopping in front of her and executing a bow that would have been appropriate for royalty. "Miss Whitmore, I wonder if you might honor me with a dance." Eleanor's voice came from somewhere far away. "I think there's been a mistake." One dark eyebrow rose. "Have I used the wrong name?" "No, but..." "Then there's no mistake." He extended his hand. "Unless you mean to refuse me?" It wasn't really a question, and Eleanor, trained from birth to be accommodating, to avoid making scenes, to do what was expected, placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt the warmth of his skin through both their gloves. He led her onto the dance floor just as the orchestra began a waltz. A waltz, which meant his hand would rest at her waist, which meant they would be closer than propriety usually allowed. "You're surprised," he said as they began to move. "I'm confused." "About what?" "Why you're dancing with me when my sister is universally acknowledged to be the beauty of the family." She'd meant it as a simple statement of fact, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "I'm not interested in your sister." "Then you're the only man in London who isn't." "I doubt that's true." His hand tightened slightly at her waist as he guided her through a turn. "Though I admit most men are fools." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The Duke seemed content with silence, and they danced for half a minute without speaking. He was an excellent dancer, smooth, confident, leading with subtle pressure rather than force. "I read your letter," he said finally. Eleanor's mind went blank. "My letter?" "To the Times, regarding the proposed factory regulations. You signed it E. Whitmore, shut." Understanding crashed over her like cold water. 3 weeks ago, she'd written a letter to the editor arguing for better working conditions in textile mills. She'd signed it with her initial because unsigned letters weren't published, but she'd never imagined anyone would trace it back to her. "How did you know it was me and not my father? Your father's writing style is..." The Duke paused, clearly searching for a diplomatic word. "Different. You write with clarity and precision. Your arguments are logical rather than emotional." And you cited sources that suggest actual research rather than received opinion. Eleanor felt her face heat. You disagree with my position. On the contrary, I found it compelling. I've since reviewed the conditions in my own holdings and implemented several of your suggestions. She nearly stumbled. The Duke's hand steadied her instantly. You're joking. I rarely joke, Miss Whitmore. I found your analysis of the relationship between worker health and productivity particularly persuasive. Why should I pay for incompetence when small improvements in conditions could yield better results? Oh, Saint Thomas. It was possibly the least romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, but Eleanor felt something warm unfurl in her chest anyway. He'd read her letter. He'd understood it. He'd acted on it. I wasn't sure it would even be published, she admitted. The editor almost didn't publish it. I happen to know he sat on it for 2 weeks before his conscience got the better of him. The Duke's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He's not accustomed to being lectured by women about economics. How do you know what the editor almost did? I own a share in the Times. Of course he did. The music was ending. Eleanor became suddenly acutely aware that everyone in the ballroom was still watching them. Her mother looked like she was deciding whether to faint or celebrate. Lady Ashford was whispering furiously to the woman beside her. When the Duke released her, Eleanor felt oddly bereft. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. He bowed again, that same too formal bow. I hope we'll have the opportunity to speak again. Then he was gone, cutting through the crowd toward the exit, while Eleanor stood in the middle of the dance floor trying to remember how to breathe. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Eleanor was immediately surrounded by people who'd never bothered speaking to her before. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about her acquaintance with the Duke. How did they meet? What did they discuss? Was she expecting further attention from His Grace? Eleanor answered with vague pleasantries while her mind raced. What had just happened? Why had the Duke singled her out? What did he want? The carriage ride home was excruciating. Her mother veered between excitement and suspicion, asking questions Eleanor couldn't answer while simultaneously instructing her on proper behavior should the Duke call. Though I can't imagine what he sees in you, her mother said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. You're not precisely plain, but you're hardly a beauty, and your figure— Mother? Eleanor closed her eyes. Please. I'm simply being realistic, darling. Men like the Duke don't pursue girls like you without reason. He must want something. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because her mother was right. Men like Duke Adrian Blackmore didn't dance with overlooked spinsters at public balls. They didn't implement economic suggestions from unsigned letters. They didn't seek out the forgotten daughter when the beautiful one was available. He wanted something. Eleanor just couldn't figure out what. She spent the next 3 days waiting for the world to return to normal. Surely the Duke's attention had been an aberration, a momentary curiosity, nothing more. Then the flowers arrived. Susan brought them to Eleanor's room with wide eyes and barely suppressed excitement. They're from the Duke, miss. A footman delivered them with his compliments. The arrangement was unusual. Not the typical hothouse roses that gentlemen sent to ladies, but a collection of wildflowers and herbs, arranged with what looked like actual thought rather than expensive abundance. Tucked among the stems was a small card in strong, slanting handwriting for Miss E. Whitmore, whose thoughts on industrial reform brightened a dull week. I would value your perspective on a related matter. Should you be willing to receive a caller tomorrow afternoon at 3? Blackmore. Eleanor read it 3 times, certain she was missing something. Her mother read it twice before declaring, He's coming here, tomorrow. Eleanor, for heaven's sake, don't just stand there. We need to prepare. Prepare turned out to mean a flurry of cleaning, rearranging furniture, and lecturing Eleanor on proper deportment while receiving important visitors. By the time 3 o'clock arrived the following day, Eleanor was exhausted and her nerves were stretched thin. When the Duke was announced, her mother practically shoved her into the drawing room before positioning herself on a chair in the corner, close enough to chaperone, far enough to suggest she wasn't listening to every word. The Duke entered with the same controlled precision he'd shown at the ball. He was dressed less formally today, though his clothes still screamed wealth and power. He bowed to Eleanor's mother with perfect courtesy, then turned to Eleanor. Miss Whitmore. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Your Grace, Eleanor gestured to a chair. Please sit. They sat. Her mother made a production of opening an embroidery hoop, though Eleanor knew for a fact she hadn't touched embroidery in years. I received your note, Eleanor said when the silence stretched too long. You mentioned a related matter? Yes. The Duke leaned forward slightly. His attention focused entirely on her in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. I'm considering sponsoring legislation that would require minimum standards for working conditions in factories. But I need the proposal to be airtight, economically sound, practically implementable, and politically viable. Eleanor blinked. And you want my help? Eleanor blinked. And you? I want your expertise. You've clearly researched this extensively. I have resources and political capital, but I lack your specific knowledge. I'm hardly an expert, Your Grace. I've read books and observed conditions where I could, but you're better informed than 90% of Parliament. He said it flatly, as simple fact rather than flattery. Most of them have never set foot in a factory. They draft legislation based on theory and ideology rather than evidence. Eleanor's mother dropped her embroidery hoop. They both ignored her. What exactly are you proposing? Eleanor asked. For the next hour, they talked. The Duke laid out his initial framework: minimum space requirements per worker, mandatory ventilation, restrictions on child labor hours. Eleanor pointed out gaps in enforcement mechanisms and suggested refinements based on what she'd learned from mill workers she'd interviewed secretly over the past year. Her mother's presence faded into irrelevance. The Duke listened with complete attention, asked sharp questions, and challenged her assumptions in ways that made Eleanor clarify her thinking rather than defend her ego. The resistance will come from factory owners who claim they can't afford improvements, the Duke said. How do we counter that? With evidence. Eleanor was warming to the topic now, forgetting to be nervous. There are mills in Lancashire that have implemented better conditions and seen productivity increase. Workers who aren't exhausted or sick produce more and better work. The initial investment pays for itself within 18 months, according to the data from Ashworth's mills. The Duke's eyes held something that might have been approval. I've reviewed the same figures, but getting other owners to accept them will require pressure. Economic pressure or social pressure? Both. Economic through demonstrating their competitors' advantage. Social through making it unconscionable to maintain current conditions. He paused. Your letter was a start. More voices like yours, properly amplified, could shift public opinion. Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead. We'd need testimonials from workers themselves. Real accounts, not sanitized versions. And comparative data showing the correlation between conditions and output across multiple mills. Abis Button. I can provide access to account books from my own holdings and potentially from others. The Duke watched her face carefully. But compiling and analyzing that data would take significant time and effort. I have time. Your family might object to you spending it on factory reform rather than social obligations. Eleanor glanced at her mother, who was now openly staring at them with an expression somewhere between bewilderment and calculation. My social obligations are minimal, Eleanor said dryly. I doubt anyone will miss me. Something flickered in the Duke's expression, anger maybe on her behalf. Then perhaps we have the foundation of a partnership, Miss Whitmore. Partnership. The word hung in the air between them, meaning more than the collaboration he was explicitly proposing. I should go. The Duke stood abruptly. But with your permission, I'll send over the documents I mentioned. Review them and let me know your thoughts. I will. He bowed to her mother, then turned back to Eleanor. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. This conversation has been enlightening. After he left, Eleanor's mother sat in stunned silence for a full minute before finding her voice. What just happened? Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were shaking slightly. I think, she said slowly, the Duke of Blackmore just asked me to help him draft legislation. That's not what he asked, Eleanor. Her mother's voice was strange. That man didn't come here to discuss factory conditions. He came to see you. Don't be ridiculous. We were clearly talking about... I have eyes, child, and ears. That man spent an hour in this room, and not once did he look away from you. Not once did his attention waver. Her mother stood, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. The Duke of Blackmore is interested in you. Romantically. Eleanor wanted to laugh, but something in her mother's expression stopped her. That's impossible. Is it? Her mother moved to the window, looking out at the street where the Duke's carriage was pulling away. You're intelligent, Eleanor. Far more intelligent than your sister. Than most women I know. You don't simper or flatter. You speak your mind. Perhaps... She trailed off, then shook her head. Perhaps that's what he wants. Someone real. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every glance. When dawn finally broke, she gave up on rest and went to her library. The documents from the Duke arrived before breakfast. A thick packet of account books, production records, and correspondence with factory managers. A note was attached in that now familiar handwriting. Read these first, then we'll discuss strategy. I'll call again on Thursday at 3, if that's convenient. B. Thursday. 3 days away. Eleanor opened the first ledger and began to read. She was still reading when Rosalind appeared in the doorway, fully recovered from her convenient chill and radiating curiosity. Mother says the Duke of Blackmore danced with you at the Ashford ball. Eleanor didn't look up from the production figures she was analyzing. Yes, and that he called here yesterday. Also yes. Eleanor. Rosalind came into the room, shutting the door behind her. What's happening? Nothing that concerns you. The Duke of Blackmore is the most eligible bachelor in England, and he's calling on my sister. That concerns me. Eleanor finally looked up. Rosalind was beautiful. There was no denying it. Golden hair, perfect features, the kind of graceful figure that made grown men stumble over their words. She was also Eleanor's sister, which meant the relationship was complicated by years of comparison and competition that neither of them had asked for. He's not interested in me romantically, Eleanor said flatly. We're collaborating on a political project. Is that what you think? That's what's happening. Rosalind sat down in the chair the Duke had occupied 2 days before. Eleanor, you're brilliant with books and ideas, but you're an idiot about people. Thank you for that assessment. I'm serious. That man didn't come here to discuss factory conditions. Or if he did, that wasn't his primary motivation. Rosalind leaned forward. Do you know what everyone is saying? They're saying the Duke has finally found someone who interests him. Someone different. Someone who doesn't bore him to tears with empty flattery and meaningless conversation. Eleanor's chest tightened. They're saying that because they can't fathom why he'd pay attention to me otherwise. Some of them, yes, but others, Rosalind hesitated. Others are saying maybe the Duke is smarter than we all gave him credit for. Maybe he sees something in you that the rest of us have been too blind to notice. The words hit harder than Eleanor expected. She turned back to her documents, blinking against sudden heat in her eyes. Don't, she said quietly. Don't give me hope about something that isn't real. What if it is real? Then I'll deal with it when it happens. But right now, I have work to do. Rosalind left without another word. Eleanor returned to the account books, forcing herself to focus on numbers and data rather than the dangerous warmth blooming in her chest. Thursday came faster than Eleanor expected and slower than she wanted. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on something simple that wouldn't suggest she was trying too hard. Her mother had the drawing room prepared as if they were receiving royalty. The Duke arrived exactly at 3, carrying a leather portfolio that looked well used. Miss Whitmore. He bowed with the same formal precision. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Your Grace. I've reviewed the documents you sent. And? Eleanor pulled out her own notes, 3 pages of closely written analysis. The correlation is clear. Better conditions correlate strongly with higher productivity, but there's a pattern in the data that I think you missed. His eyebrows rose. Oh? The mills that show the strongest improvement are those where changes were implemented gradually rather than all at once. Workers need time to adapt. Management needs time to refine processes. Dramatic overnight reforms create disruption that offsets the benefits for the first 6 months. The Duke took her notes, scanning them rapidly. Eleanor watched his expression shift from skeptical to thoughtful to something that looked almost like excitement. You're right, yet, he said finally. I completely missed that. Which means the legislation needs built-in timelines rather than immediate compliance mandates. Exactly. Phase it in over 18 months, with inspection checkpoints to verify progress. They dove into the details. Eleanor forgot about her mother's presence in the corner. She forgot about propriety and social performance and all the rules she'd spent her life learning. She just talked, arguing, questioning, building on the Duke's ideas and letting him build on hers. When the clock struck 5, they both looked up in surprise. "I should go," the Duke said, though he made no move to stand. "But, Miss Whitmore, I wonder, would you be willing to meet more regularly? This work requires consistent collaboration, and I find your insights invaluable." Eleanor's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "How regularly?" "3 times a week, perhaps. Here, if your family doesn't object. Or at my estate, with appropriate chaperoning." Her mother made a small noise. The Duke glanced at her, then back at Eleanor. "Naturally, all proper protocols would be observed," he added. "I have no interest in damaging Miss Whitmore's reputation." "What about building it?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. The Duke's eyes locked on hers. "I beg your pardon? My reputation is already negligible. I'm the plain sister, the unmarriageable daughter. Your attention has made people notice me, but it's made them curious and suspicious in equal measure." Eleanor swallowed hard. "I'm asking what your intentions are, Your Grace, because I don't have the luxury of pretending this is only about factory reform." The silence that followed felt like falling. Then the Duke smiled. A real smile. Not the polite expression he'd worn until now. It transformed his face, softening the harsh angles and reaching his eyes. "My intentions," he said slowly, "are to see you as often as you'll permit, to speak with you about matters both practical and personal, to learn everything that interests you and share everything that interests me, and eventually, if you're amenable, to court you properly and publicly." Eleanor couldn't breathe. "Why?" "Because in 30 years of life, I've never met anyone who challenged me the way you do, who sees problems clearly and solves them creatively, who speaks honestly rather than strategically." He leaned forward slightly. "Because you wrote a letter about factory conditions that most people wouldn't even notice, and you signed it because you believed it mattered more than your comfort. That's who you are, Eleanor, and that's exactly who I want." Her mother's embroidery hoop hit the floor again. Neither of them looked. "I'm not beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "You're extraordinary." The Duke stood, suddenly formal again. "But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, I'm asking permission to call on you 3 times weekly, ostensibly to collaborate on this legislation. If during that time we find we suit each other in more than just intellectual partnership, we can proceed accordingly. If not, we'll have done good work together and parted as colleagues." It was a careful offer, a safe offer, one that gave Eleanor room to retreat if she wanted. She didn't want to retreat. 3 times weekly is acceptable," she said. "Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons, if that suits your schedule. Perfectly." The Duke bowed one last time. "Until Monday, then." After he left, Eleanor sat in stunned silence while her mother gathered her abandoned embroidery with shaking hands. "That," her mother said finally, "was a proposal. Not of marriage, not yet, but of courtship, Eleanor. The Duke of Blackmore just asked to court you." Eleanor pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. "This can't be real." "It's real, which means we have 3 days to prepare you for Monday, and heaven help us both, because I have no idea how to prepare a daughter for something like this." But as Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room that evening, past family portraits that had never included her in any place of prominence, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The Duke had called her extraordinary. No one had ever called her that before. Maybe, just maybe, the world was bigger than she'd been taught to believe. Maybe there was room in it for a girl who read too much and spoke too plainly, and believed that intelligence mattered more than beauty. Maybe she'd been invisible for so long that she'd forgotten she could be seen. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday arrived wearing storm clouds and Eleanor's best day dress, the one that actually fit properly because it had been made for her rather than adapted from Rosalind's wardrobe. She'd been awake since dawn, alternating between reviewing her notes on the factory legislation and staring at her reflection, searching for whatever it was the Duke claimed to see. The face looking back offered no answers. Same unremarkable features, same serious expression. Same Eleanor, who'd spent 23 years being overlooked. Except the Duke didn't overlook her. That thought carried her downstairs at 2:30, her portfolio of research tucked under one arm. Her mother intercepted her in the hallway, adjusting Eleanor's collar with hands that trembled slightly. "Remember what we discussed," her mother said. "Posture, smiling. Don't contradict him on matters of—" "Mother," Eleanor stepped back gently. "He asked me to collaborate because I think independently. Pretending otherwise would defeat the purpose. Men say they want independent thinking until they actually encounter it. Then he'll be disappointed, and we'll both move on." But her mother's eyes held something Eleanor had never seen directed at her before. Worry. Real worry, the kind usually reserved for Rosalind's prospects. "Eleanor, be careful. Men like the Duke don't pursue women like you unless—" The doorbell rang. Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat. She forced herself to walk, not run, to the drawing room. Her mother followed, already settling into her chaperoning corner with an expression that suggested she expected disaster. When the Duke entered, Eleanor forgot how to breathe properly. He looked different somehow, less formal, though his clothes were still impeccable. The severe expression he wore in public had softened into something almost warm. When his eyes found hers, they held an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Miss Whitmore," he bowed. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Shall we begin?" They sat. Eleanor opened her portfolio, pulling out the framework she'd drafted over the weekend. A detailed implementation timeline with built-in flexibility for different factory sizes. "I've outlined 3 tiers," she said, falling into the safety of analysis. "Large operations with more than 200 workers would have 12 months to comply. Medium-sized factories, 18 months. Small workshops could have up to 2 years with financial assistance available for those who demonstrate genuine hardship." The Duke took the pages, his attention shifting immediately to the work. "The tiered approach is sound, but the financial assistance mechanism, how would that work without creating opportunities for fraud?" Some independent inspectors, randomly assigned, rotated quarterly to prevent bribery. Their reports would determine eligibility. Eleanor leaned forward, warming to her argument. "The key is making fraud more expensive than compliance, which requires inspectors who can't be bought, or who cost more to buy than the savings from avoiding compliance." The Duke's mouth curved into that almost smile. "Cynical, Miss Whitmore. Realistic, Your Grace." They worked for an hour, their conversation flowing between practical logistics and broader philosophy. Eleanor found herself arguing points she hadn't fully formed until the words left her mouth, pushed by the Duke's sharp questions and sharper mind. "The resistance won't just be economic," he said at one point, tapping the margins where Eleanor had noted potential opposition. "Some factory owners will fight this because they genuinely believe workers are property in all but name. That improved conditions will make them soft, less controllable. Then we make it about their profits, not their principles." Eleanor met his eyes directly. "People who view workers as property won't be swayed by moral arguments, but they understand loss. Show them competitors gaining advantages through better conditions, and greed will do what compassion can't." The Duke set down the papers, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You have a ruthless streak, Miss Whitmore. Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation, and a compliment." He paused. "Most people your age, your background, wouldn't think in such calculated terms. Most people my age and background haven't spent years watching the world work from the margins." Eleanor heard the bitterness in her voice and tried to soften it. "When you're invisible, you see things clearly. No one performs for someone they don't notice. You're not invisible anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that had nothing to do with factory legislation. Eleanor's mother rustled in the corner, a deliberate reminder of her presence. The Duke straightened, his expression shifting back to professional courtesy. "I should let you rest, but before I go, there's a dinner party at the Ashford estate Friday evening. I wonder if you and your family might attend as my guests." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Your guests?" "I'm expected to make an appearance, and I'd appreciate familiar company." His eyes held hers. Also, several members of Parliament will be there. It would be useful to gauge their reactions to this proposal in informal conversation. It was a reasonable explanation, a practical one. But Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying, that attending as his invited guests would be a public statement. Society would draw conclusions. We'd be honored, her mother said before Eleanor could respond, practically levitating from her chair with excitement. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. Excellent. I'll send my carriage at 7. After he left, Eleanor's mother dissolved into planning mode, already mentally cataloging what they'd wear and how they'd prepare Rosalind for maximum impact. Eleanor let the words wash over her, her mind still replaying the conversation. You're not invisible anymore. The problem was, she wasn't sure she wanted to be visible. Not like this. Not as the Duke's curiosity, his project, his charitable interest in the odd daughter nobody else wanted. Eleanor, are you listening? Her mother's voice cut through the spiral. I said we need to discuss your comportment at the dinner. You cannot simply talk about factories and legislation all evening. You must be charming. I don't know how to be charming. Then learn. You have 4 days. Those 4 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt like warfare. Her mother coached her on conversation topics suitable for mixed company. Rosalind offered advice on managing attention without appearing to seek it. Even her father emerged from his study long enough to remind her that the Duke's interest, however flattering, came with expectations she might not be prepared to meet. Men of his position don't marry for affection, her father said bluntly. If he's courting you, he has reasons. Make sure you understand what they are before you're in too deep to extract yourself safely. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because her father was right. The Duke had wealth, power, political influence. He could have any woman in England. Why choose her? Friday arrived with cold rain and Eleanor's growing dread. The dress her mother had commissioned was beautiful, deep blue silk that actually suited her coloring, but it felt like armor for a battle she didn't know how to fight. When the Duke's carriage arrived, Eleanor was ready, or as ready as she'd ever be. The ride to the Ashford estate was mercifully short. Her mother chattered nervously. Rosalind sat in perfect stillness, looking like a painting of an angel. Eleanor tried not to fidget with her gloves. The Duke met them at the entrance, and Eleanor watched his expression carefully. His eyes swept past Rosalind without pausing, past her mother's eager smile, and landed on Eleanor with that same focused intensity. Miss Whitmore, you look lovely. Thank you, Your Grace. He offered his arm. Eleanor took it, hyper-aware of every eye watching as they entered together. The Ashford ballroom was smaller than the one where they'd first danced, but no less grand. Candlelight glittered off crystal and jewels. Conversations paused as they passed. Eleanor felt the weight of scrutiny like a physical pressure. Beside her, the Duke seemed utterly unbothered. Relax, he murmured. They're only people. People who are trying to figure out why you're here with me. Let them wonder. His hand covered hers briefly where it rested on his arm. You're here because I want you here. That's all that matters. But it wasn't all that mattered, and they both knew it. Lord Ashford descended on them immediately, all false warmth and calculating eyes. Your Grace, what a pleasure. And the Whitmore family, how delightful. Mo? The Duke made the required pleasantries while Eleanor tried to blend into the wallpaper through sheer force of will. It didn't work. Lady Ashford appeared next, then Lord and Lady Morrison, then a parade of faces Eleanor barely recognized. Everyone wanted to speak to the Duke, and because Eleanor was beside him, they had to acknowledge her too. Miss Whitmore, Lady Morrison said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How unexpected to see you here. I had thought your sister was the family beauty. The words landed like a slap. Eleanor felt her mother tense beside her. My sister is indeed beautiful, Eleanor said carefully, but His Grace invited our whole family. How generous. Lady Morrison's gaze slid to the Duke. Though I confess surprise at your choice of companion for the evening, Your Grace. There are so many young ladies who would have been honored. Indeed. The Duke's voice went cold, which is precisely why I chose Miss Whitmore. She's intelligent enough to discuss matters beyond weather and gossip, and honest enough not to bore me with empty flattery. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. The silence that Lady Morrison's smile froze. I meant no offense. Of course not. The Duke inclined his head with icy courtesy. If you'll excuse us, I promised Miss Whitmore an introduction to Lord Pemberton. He's interested in the factory legislation we've been developing. He steered Eleanor away before Lady Morrison could respond. Eleanor's hands were shaking. You shouldn't have said that, she whispered. Why not? It's true. Because now she'll make me pay for it. Women like Lady Morrison don't forget slights. Then she can be angry. I don't particularly care. The Duke's jaw was tight. I won't stand by while people insult you to your face. They've been insulting me my whole life. I'm used to it. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Around them, conversations continued, but Eleanor felt like they were alone in a bubble of tension. You shouldn't have to be used to it, he said quietly. That's the point. Before Eleanor could respond, a new voice cut through the moment. Blackmore, there you are. A tall man with silver hair approached, his smile sharp as a blade. Eleanor recognized him from political cartoons, Lord Ashford's brother, a powerful member of Parliament known for blocking reform legislation. Ashford. The Duke's expression went carefully neutral. I didn't realize you were attending. Last-minute decision. Wanted to see what had you abandoning your usual hermit tendencies. His gaze slid to Eleanor. And to meet the young lady who's apparently convinced you to champion factory reform. There was something nasty in his tone. Eleanor felt the Duke's arm tense under her hand. Miss Eleanor Whitmore, the Duke said. May I present Lord Edmund Ashford? Oh, eats. Miss Whitmore. Ashford bowed with exaggerated courtesy. I've heard so much about you. The invisible daughter, suddenly visible. How remarkable. Lord Ashford. Eleanor forced her voice steady. I understand you're the brains behind this factory legislation proposal. Ashford's smile never wavered. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how many factories have you personally visited? How many workers have you employed? How much capital have you invested in industrial ventures? The questions were designed to humiliate, to expose her inexperience and undermine her credibility. Eleanor felt everyone nearby listening, waiting for her to stumble. She lifted her chin. None, my lord. But I've read the parliamentary reports on factory conditions. I've studied comparative productivity data from mills across Lancashire and Yorkshire. I've interviewed workers about their experiences when illness or injury made them unable to work. And I've analyzed the economic arguments both for and against reform. She paused. How many of those things have you done? Ashford's smile thinned. I've sat in Parliament for 20 years, young lady. I understand these matters better than someone who's merely read a few books. Do you? Because the legislation currently under consideration would require conditions that increase costs by an average of 3%, while improving productivity by 7%. That's a net gain for factory owners, which should make passage relatively simple. Unless, of course, the opposition isn't actually about economics. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that resistance to reasonable reform often stems from ideology rather than practicality. Eleanor felt the Duke's stillness beside her, but she couldn't stop now. Some people oppose improving workers' conditions because they believe suffering builds character, or because they fear treating workers humanely will lead to demands for further rights. Those are philosophical positions, Lord Ashford, not economic ones. The crowd around them had grown. Eleanor could feel her mother's panic radiating from somewhere behind her. She'd just publicly challenged a powerful lord. At her first major social event, while standing beside the Duke, Ashford's face had gone red. You're very bold for a girl with no standing and no prospects. Edmund! The Duke's voice cut like a whip. That's enough. Is it? You bring this nobody to a respectable gathering, let her spout radical nonsense, and I'm supposed to, You're supposed to remember you're a guest in your brother's house and behave accordingly. The Duke's expression was glacial. Miss Whitmore has more understanding of industrial economics in her smallest finger than most of Parliament combined. If you're threatened by that, perhaps you should examine why. Ashford stared at him, clearly weighing options. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I see. So that's how it is. The great Duke of Blackmore, brought low by a plain spinster with radical ideas. How the mighty fall. Edmund! Lord Ashford Sr. materialized from the crowd, his face pale. Apologize immediately. Wait, for what? Speaking truth? But Edmund Ashford's eyes were already calculating, seeing how the crowd was reacting. Half looked scandalized, half looked intrigued. Very well. My apologies, Miss Whitmore, if my directness offended. I'm merely concerned for His Grace's reputation. His Grace's reputation is his own concern, Eleanor said quietly. Not yours. She turned to the Duke. I think I need some air. He guided her toward the terrace without a word. Eleanor's mother tried to follow, but the Duke held up a hand. A moment, Lady Whitmore, please. The terrace was cold and empty. Eleanor gripped the stone railing, trying to control the shaking that had spread from her hands to her entire body. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have engaged. I should have smiled and deflected, and you were magnificent. Eleanor turned to find the Duke watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. I just humiliated you in front of half of Parliament. You defended your work and your principles against a bully. He moved closer. Eleanor, do you understand what just happened? You challenged Edmund Ashford on economics and policy, and you won. Everyone in that room knows it. Everyone in that room thinks I'm an upstart who doesn't know her place. Some of them, yes. Others are thinking the Duke of Blackmore finally found someone who won't bore him to death with vapid conversation. His hand came up to cup her cheek, the first time he'd touched her with such familiarity. You were everything I knew you could be. Eleanor's breath caught. Adrian, she'd used his name. She hadn't meant to, but the Duke, Adrian, didn't seem to mind. This is going to get harder, he said quietly. People like Edmund will come after you. They'll dig into your past, spread rumors, try to find anything they can use to discredit you and embarrass me. Then maybe we should… No. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I'm not backing away. The question is whether you want to. Because once we go back inside, once I make it clear you have my full support, there's no going back. You'll be a target. Eleanor's mind raced. She could retreat now, apologize to Lord Ashford, fade back into invisibility, return to her safe life of books and silence. Or she could step forward into something terrifying and uncertain and possibly wonderful. I'm already a target, she said. Might as well make it worthwhile. Adrian's smile transformed his face. Then, before Eleanor could process what was happening, he kissed her. It was brief, chaste, entirely inappropriate for an unmarried couple on a semi-public terrace. When he pulled back, Eleanor was dizzy. That was improper, I know. He didn't look remotely sorry, but I've wanted to do that since you handed me 3 pages of notes that completely upended my assumptions about factory reform. Eleanor laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. That's possibly the strangest romantic confession I've ever heard. That was a thing. You're the strangest woman I've ever met. It seems fitting. They returned to the party together. The whispers started immediately, but Adrian kept Eleanor's hand on his arm, and his expression dared anyone to comment. Lord Edmund Ashford watched from across the room, his expression dark. Lady Morrison whispered furiously to her companions. Eleanor's mother looked torn between triumph and terror. And Eleanor? Eleanor felt like she was walking a tightrope over an abyss, with no safety net and no clear destination. But Adrian's hand covered hers, steady and sure. Still with me? He murmured. Eleanor thought about the Duke's earlier question, about what happened next, about targets and consequences and social warfare she wasn't trained to fight. Then she thought about factories and legislation and workers who needed someone to fight for them, about intelligence that had always been dismissed as unwomanly, about a man who looked at her and saw someone extraordinary instead of someone forgettable. Still with you, she said. The night wasn't even half over. And Eleanor had already made enemies of some of London's most powerful people. Tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. But tonight, walking beside the Duke of Blackmore with her head held high, Eleanor Whitmore felt visible for the first time in her life. And she had no intention of fading back into the shadows now. The scandal broke 3 days later in the morning papers. Eleanor was having breakfast when Susan brought in the Times with trembling hands. Her mother took one look at the front page and went white. Eleanor, upstairs, now. But Eleanor had already seen the headline: Duke's radical paramour, Blackmore's unsuitable attachment to factory reformist. Her hands went numb as she scanned the article. It was masterfully vicious, never quite lying, but twisting every truth into something ugly. Her letter to the editor was characterized as unwomanly political meddling. Her collaboration with the Duke became a calculated social climbing scheme. The confrontation with Lord Edmund Ashford was painted as unseemly aggression from an ill-bred upstart. But the real poison was in the final paragraphs. Sources close to the Whitmore family suggest Miss Eleanor has long harbored resentment toward her more accomplished younger sister, and may be using the Duke's inexplicable interest to elevate herself above her natural station. Questions must be asked about what methods she employed to capture the attention of a man so far above her reach. More troubling still are whispers of the Duke's late wife, whose untimely death 7 years ago was ruled accidental despite inconsistencies never fully explained. One wonders if Miss Whitmore truly understands the nature of the man whose favor she so eagerly courts. Eleanor read it twice, her breakfast turning to ash in her stomach. The implication was clear: she'd manipulated the Duke, and he might be dangerous. Both claims designed to destroy her reputation and isolate Adrian simultaneously. "Who wrote this?" Her voice came out steady despite the roaring in her ears. "It's unsigned," her father said from the doorway. He looked older suddenly, tired, but the style suggests Edmund Ashford's usual writer. He's done this before to people who cross him. "What do we do?" "You stop seeing the Duke immediately. Issue a statement that the acquaintance was professional only, that any misunderstanding was no." Her father's expression hardened. "Eleanor, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Edmund Ashford is a powerful man with powerful friends. If he's decided to destroy you, then I'm already destroyed." Eleanor set down the paper carefully. "Denying it now just proves I'm afraid. It makes me look guilty. You're not thinking clearly. Your reputation was never good enough to protect anyway." Eleanor met her father's eyes. "I'm the plain daughter, remember? The unmarriageable one. What exactly am I protecting?" Her mother made a strangled sound. "Your future, your sister's prospects, our family's standing. Rosalind is beautiful and charming. She'll be fine. As for our family's standing," Eleanor laughed, bitter. "Father, we're barely gentry. We've been hanging on by our fingernails for years, pretending we belong among people who tolerate us because we're useful. This just makes it official." "Eleanor, I need to see the Duke. Where's my coat?" She was out the door before they could stop her, into a hired carriage and rattling toward the Duke's London residence. She had no appointment, no invitation, no plan beyond needing to see him immediately. The butler who answered looked scandalized. "Miss Whitmore, His Grace is not receiving—" "Tell him I'm here. Now, set." Something in her expression must have convinced him. He disappeared, leaving Eleanor standing in an entrance hall that could have swallowed her family's entire house. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, paintings that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned. This was Adrian's world, and she was a fool for thinking she could ever really belong in it. "Eleanor." Adrian descended the stairs 2 at a time, still in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted and furious and relieved all at once. "You shouldn't be here," he said, taking her arm and steering her into a side room. "It's not proper. And after that article—" "I don't care about proper." Eleanor pulled the crumpled newspaper from her bag. "Have you seen this?" "Well?" "I've seen it." His jaw was tight. "My solicitor is already drafting a response. We'll sue for libel, demand a retraction. That's not enough. Eleanor, let me handle this. Edmund plays dirty, but I have resources he doesn't. I can—" "He called you a murderer." The words came out sharp. "Or as good as. He implied you killed your wife." Adrian's expression went cold. "My wife died in a riding accident 7 years ago. The inquest ruled it accidental. Edmund knows that." "But he's planning doubt anyway." Eleanor paced, her mind working furiously. "He's not just attacking me, he's attacking you through me, making people question your judgment, your character, your fitness for political leadership." "I'm aware." "Then you know a legal response isn't enough. Laws and retractions take months. By then, the damage is done." She stopped, facing him. "We need to go on the offensive. Adrian studied her carefully. What are you suggesting? The factory legislation. We accelerate it. Present it to Parliament now before Edmund can build more opposition. Make it public. Make it loud. Make it impossible to ignore. Eleanor, that's madness. We're not ready. The research isn't complete. The political groundwork is never going to be ready if we wait. Edmund will make sure of that. She moved closer, willing him to understand. He attacked me because I'm your weak point. He thinks if he destroys my reputation, you'll back away to protect yourself. Prove him wrong. Stand by the legislation, stand by me, and show everyone that you can't be intimidated. You're asking me to gamble my political capital on an incomplete proposal. I'm asking you to fight instead of defending. Eleanor's hands were shaking again, but her voice stayed firm. You said I was extraordinary. You said I challenged you. Was that true? Or was it just words? Adrian's eyes flashed. That's unfair. It's a simple question. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Adrian crossed to his desk, pulling out a folder thick with papers. The proposal goes to committee in 2 weeks. I was planning to introduce it quietly, build support gradually. He looked at her. If we accelerate, if we make this public now, there's no going back. Every enemy I have will unite against us. The scrutiny will be brutal. Are you prepared for that? Eleanor thought about the article, about Lady Morrison's cutting remarks and Edmund Ashford's contempt, about a lifetime of being invisible, followed by days of being dissected in public. No, she said honestly, but I'll do it anyway. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. He rounded the desk, catching her face between his hands. You're sure? Because once this starts, I can't protect you from all of it. Some of the attacks will be personal, vicious. They'll dig into everything, your family, your past, things you'd rather keep private. I don't have anything to hide. Everyone has something. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I need you to be certain, Eleanor. I can't lose you to this. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. You won't lose me. But Adrian, the article mentioned your wife. If we're doing this, I need to know the truth. All of it. His hands dropped. He turned away, moving to the window. Catherine was beautiful, accomplished, everything a duchess should be. Our marriage was arranged, but we were compatible. Not passionately in love, but respectful, content. He paused. She wanted children desperately. I was less certain, but I didn't deny her. After 3 miscarriages, the physicians warned another pregnancy could be dangerous. Eleanor waited, her heart aching. She got pregnant anyway, kept it secret for months, afraid I'd insist she end it. When I found out, we argued, terribly. I said things I regret. His voice went rough. She went riding the next morning, something the physicians had forbidden. Her horse bolted. She fell. Died 3 days later from internal bleeding. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Adrian turned back to her. If I'd been kinder, if I'd understood what the pressure for an heir was doing to her, if I'd... You can't know what would have changed anything. Eleanor crossed to him. But Edmund is using her death to hurt you. He's implying you had something to do with it. Let him. I've lived with the guilt for 7 years. Public accusation won't make it worse. Yes, it will. Eleanor took his hands. Because now it's not just about you. It's about us. And I won't let him destroy what we're building with lies about the past. Adrian pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You're absolutely certain about this? About accelerating the legislation? About weathering what comes next? I'm terrified, but yes. Then we'll need allies. People who can't be intimidated or bought. He straightened, already thinking strategically. Lord Pemberton owes me a favor. Lady Ashford Sr. hates her brother-in-law and might enjoy watching him squirm. And there's a journalist at the Chronicle who's been looking for a story that matters. What about your political colleagues? Most will wait to see which way the wind blows, but there are a few. He pulled out paper, began making notes. We'll need testimony from factory workers. Real accounts, names and faces that make this human rather than theoretical. I can arrange that. I have contacts from my research. They worked through the morning building strategy, identifying allies and obstacles. Susan appeared at some point with tea that neither of them touched. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows before Adrian finally set down his pen. "This is going to change everything," he said quietly. "I know. People will hate you. They'll say terrible things. Question your motives, your character, your virtue. Let them." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a small box from his desk drawer. "I was planning to wait, court you properly, give you time to be certain." He opened the box, revealing a ring, simple gold with a single deep blue sapphire. "But if we're doing this, if we're going to war with half of London, I need you to know my intentions are serious, permanent." Eleanor's breath caught. "Adrian, I'm not asking yet, not formally, but I'm telling you, when this is over, when we've won or lost, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And I need to know if there's any chance you'll say yes." The room seemed to contract to just the two of them. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Adrian's face. She saw fear there, carefully hidden, but present. Fear that she'd refuse. Fear that he was asking too much. "When this is over," she said slowly, "ask me properly. With flowers and poetry and all the ridiculous traditional nonsense. And I'll give you my answer then." That's not a no. It's not a yes either. It's a promise that I'll still be here to answer. Eleanor touched the ring gently. "But put that away for now. If people see it, they'll say you're trying to save my reputation by marrying me. When you propose, I want it to be because you want me. Not because society demands it." Adrian closed the box with a snap. "I want you, Eleanor Whitmore. I've wanted you since you argued with me about factory conditions and refused to back down. I'll want you whether society approves or not. Then prove it. Help me make this legislation happen. Show them all that I'm more than just your unsuitable attachment." The next week was chaos. Adrian presented the factory reform proposal to Parliament, with Eleanor's research prominently cited. The reaction was explosive, half supportive, half outraged, everyone with an opinion. The Chronicle ran Eleanor's interview with 3 textile workers who described conditions in graphic detail. Other papers ran rebuttals calling the testimony fabricated. Eleanor's house was besieged by journalists. Some wanted her perspective. Others wanted scandalous quotes they could twist. Her mother stopped leaving the house. Rosalind fielded marriage proposals from men who found the controversy exciting and invitations from families who wanted nothing to do with them in equal measure. Through it all, Adrian was a constant presence. He escorted Eleanor to meetings with sympathetic Parliament members, stood beside her during interviews, made it brutally clear that attacking her meant attacking him. The backlash was vicious. Political cartoons showed Eleanor as a puppeteer controlling the Duke. Editorials questioned her education, her breeding, her right to opinions on matters of state. Someone started a rumor that she'd been seen leaving Adrian's residence at dawn. Technically true, but deliberately misinterpreted. "They're calling me a whore," Eleanor said flatly, reading the latest gossip column. Adrian snatched the paper away. "Ignore it. How? It's everywhere. My family is humiliated. Rosalind can barely show her face. My mother will survive. They all will." He pulled her close. "Eleanor, listen to me. This is what Edmund wanted, to break you with social pressure. If you give up now, he wins. Maybe he should win. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. You are." Adrian's voice was fierce. "You stood up to him at the Ashford ball. You've survived 2 weeks of concentrated character assassination. You're still here, still fighting. That's strength." But Eleanor felt anything but strong. She felt exhausted, exposed, like every private part of herself had been dragged into public view and found wanting. The breaking point came at the theater. Adrian had tickets to a new play, and he insisted they attend together, a deliberate public appearance meant to show they wouldn't be cowed into hiding. Eleanor wore her best dress and tried to ignore the stares as they entered. They made it through the first act. During intermission, Eleanor excused herself to the ladies' retiring room. She was washing her hands when 3 women entered, their conversation already in progress. Utterly shameless, throwing herself at him like that. Well, what choice does she have? Plain as porridge, poor as a church mouse. The Duke is her only hope. Eleanor froze. "I heard she seduced him, used radical politics to seem interesting. then trapped him with scandal. Someone should warn him. The Duke's first wife died under suspicious circumstances. What if this Whitmore girl is equally dangerous? Eleanor's hands clenched on the basin. She should leave, should pretend she hadn't heard. Instead, she turned around. The women went pale. Lady Morrison stood in the center, flanked by two younger matrons whose names Eleanor didn't know. "Please," Eleanor said quietly. "Continue. I'm fascinated to hear more about how I seduced the Duke with my dangerous radical politics." "Miss Whitmore." Lady Morrison recovered quickly. "We didn't realize—" Lady Morrison recovered. "That I was here, or that I might object to being called a calculating seductress in a public washroom?" Eleanor stepped forward. "Let me be clear. Since you're all so interested in my relationship with His Grace, I didn't pursue him, I didn't seduce him, I didn't trap him. He sought me out because he values intelligence over empty beauty and substance over social performance." "You're very bold for someone with no standing. I have the standing the Duke gives me, which currently is more than you have." Eleanor's voice went cold. "And since we're sharing opinions, let me share mine. Women like you, who tear down other women to feel superior, who define your worth by how well you please men, who enforce rules designed to keep us all small and silent, you're the reason reform is necessary. Not just in factories, everywhere." Lady Morrison's face went red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I have nothing left to lose. You've already destroyed my reputation. You've humiliated my family. You've called me every name short of criminal. What else can you do to me?" The women stared at her in shocked silence. Eleanor smoothed her skirts, suddenly calm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a second act to watch." She swept past them, her head high, her heart hammering. She made it back to their box before her knees started shaking. Adrian took one look at her face. "What happened?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." But when the second act started, Eleanor couldn't focus. The encounter kept replaying in her mind. She'd burned bridges tonight, made enemies of women who could make her life miserable in 100 small ways. And she'd done it without hesitation. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. The play ended. They emerged into the cool night air, and immediately Eleanor knew something was wrong. A crowd had gathered near their carriage. Reporters, but also others, common people, workers, women in plain dresses. "There she is!" someone shouted. Eleanor tensed. Adrian's hand went to her waist, protective. But the crowd wasn't angry. A woman pushed forward, work-roughened hands clutching a crumpled newspaper. "Miss Whitmore, I read your interview, the one in the Chronicle." Her voice shook. "I work in a textile mill in Southwark. Everything you said about the conditions, the hours, the children getting hurt, it's all true. And nobody ever cared before. Nobody with power ever listened." Eleanor didn't know what to say. "We just wanted to say thank you." The woman looked at Adrian. "Both of you, for trying to help us." More voices joined in. A man who'd lost 2 fingers in a loom accident, a mother whose daughter had died from lung disease at 14, a boy who'd been working 12-hour days since he was 8. Eleanor listened to each story, her throat tight. These were the people the legislation was supposed to help. Real people with real suffering, not abstract theories in parliamentary debate. "We'll keep fighting," she told them. "I promise." When they finally made it to the carriage, Eleanor was shaking. But this time it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. "Did you see them?" She grabbed Adrian's hand. "Those people, they're why this matters. Not the politics or the social games. Them." I saw. Adrian's expression was complicated. "Eleanor, you understand what just happened. You've become a symbol. To them, you're not just fighting for legislation. You're fighting for them, against people who have power over their lives and don't care about their suffering." "Good. Let me be a symbol then. If it helps even one child avoid dying in a factory, it's worth it." But Adrian looked troubled. Symbols are dangerous. They inspire devotion and hatred in equal measure. Edmund won't just try to discredit you anymore. He'll try to destroy you completely. Then let him try. The next day, Edmund Ashford made his move. Eleanor was in Adrian's study reviewing testimony for the parliamentary committee when Adrian burst in with a newspaper. "Read this. Now." "Maman." The article was brutal. It claimed Eleanor had fabricated the worker testimonies, that she'd paid people to lie about factory conditions, that the Chronicle interview was staged propaganda funded by radical elements seeking to destabilize industry. But worse, much worse, it included a sworn statement from a supposed former worker claiming Eleanor had offered him money to exaggerate his story. "It's a lie," Eleanor said immediately. I know it's a lie, but we need to prove it." Adrian was already moving, grabbing his coat. "The man who made that statement, do you recognize the name?" Eleanor scanned the article. "Thomas Wright." "No, I've never heard of him." "Then we find him. We get the truth, and we expose Edmund for the fraud he is." They found Thomas Wright in a tavern near the docks, drunk and scared. It took 20 pounds, and Adrian's most intimidating stare, but eventually he broke. "Ashford's man paid me," he admitted. "Said I just had to sign the paper, that it was for a political dispute. I didn't know what it really said." "You accused an innocent woman of fraud." I know, but I needed the money and he said nobody would get hurt." Adrian leaned in close. "You're going to recant, publicly, in writing, and you're going to testify about who really paid you." Wright went paler. "I can't. Ashford will... Ashford will what? Have you killed?" Adrian's voice was ice. "I'm the Duke of Blackmore. He's a lord with political aspirations and no real power beyond what fear gives him. Who do you think will win if this becomes open warfare?" Eleanor watched Adrian work, seeing the ruthlessness beneath his usual controlled demeanor. This was the man who'd built a fortune, who'd navigated Parliament's brutal politics, who'd survived his wife's death and 7 years of speculation. This was the man who'd chosen her. Wright signed the recantation that afternoon. Adrian had it delivered to every major newspaper, along with a statement promising legal action against Edmund Ashford for fraud and slander. The explosion was immediate. Edmund denied everything, claimed Wright was lying now, that Eleanor had threatened him. But the damage was done. The careful campaign of character assassination had a crack in it. Then Edmund played his final card. The letter arrived at Eleanor's house 3 days before the parliamentary vote. Her mother brought it to her, hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a simple message. "Withdraw your support for the factory legislation by tomorrow, or I will reveal information about your sister that will destroy her prospects permanently." Eleanor read it twice, ice flooding her veins. "What information?" she asked her mother. Her mother's face crumpled. "Rosalind has been seeing someone, a music teacher, unsuitable, but she thought..." Her voice broke. "If that becomes public, she's ruined. No respectable man will have her." Eleanor looked at her sister, who'd appeared in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," Rosalind whispered. "I never meant... I thought we were being careful." "How did Edmund find out?" "He has spies everywhere. Servants who report to him, friends who gossip." Her mother's voice was desperate. "Eleanor, you have to withdraw. I know you care about this legislation, but Rosalind is your sister. We're your family." Eleanor stared at the letter. One word from her, and Rosalind would be safe. Her family's reputation would survive. The battle would end, and workers would keep dying in factories that didn't care whether they lived. She thought about the woman at the theater, the mother who'd lost her daughter, the boy working 12-hour days at 8 years old. Then she thought about Rosalind, beautiful, charming Rosalind, who'd always been kind to Eleanor despite their mother's favoritism, who deserved happiness, even if it came in an unsuitable package. "No," Eleanor said quietly. "What?" "I won't withdraw." Eleanor met her mother's horrified gaze. "But I will find another way to protect Rosalind." She went immediately to Adrian's residence. He was in a meeting with parliamentary allies, but she didn't care. She burst into his study without announcement. "I need a favor, a large one." Adrian stood, dismissing the other men with a gesture. "What's happened?" Eleanor showed him the letter, explained about Rosalind and the music teacher. Watched his expression go from concerned to furious. "That bastard! He's threatening your family to get to you. Can you help? The music teacher, if he had a position somewhere respectable. If Rosalind's relationship wasn't scandalous but merely unconventional, consider it done." Adrian was already thinking, "I have a friend who runs a music conservatory. Respectable, well-funded. If this teacher has actual talent, we can arrange a prestigious appointment. Turn scandal into romantic nobility. The beautiful daughter choosing love over status. That simple? Ukom.
Nothing about this is simple, but yes, it can be managed. His eyes searched hers. You're not withdrawing. No. Even though Edmund will release whatever information he has anyway,
Just to punish you for defying him.
let him. Rosalind will survive, and maybe... Eleanor's voice caught.
Maybe she'll be happier married to someone she loves than to some lord who only wanted her because she's beautiful. Adrian pulled her close. You're extraordinary. You know that? You keep saying that. I'm starting to think you might mean it. I've never meant anything more. The parliamentary vote was scheduled for Friday. By Wednesday, London was holding its breath. The legislation had support, but the attacks on Eleanor had created doubt. Some members questioned whether backing reform meant endorsing a woman of questionable character. Thursday night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her room, running through arguments, anticipating objections, preparing for failure. A pebble hit her window.
She opened it to find Adrian in the garden below, still in evening clothes. What are you doing here? It's midnight. Come down, please.
She threw a shawl over her nightdress and crept downstairs. Adrian was waiting by the garden gate, looking wild and desperate, and not at all like the controlled duke she'd come to know. We could run, he said abruptly. Right now. My carriage is around the corner. We could be in Dover by morning, on a ship to France by afternoon. Leave all of this behind. Eleanor stared at him. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. I have funds abroad, properties in Italy, France. We could live quietly, away from Parliament and scandal, and people who want to destroy you for daring to have opinions. He took her hands. You don't have to fight this battle, Eleanor. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for legislation that might not even pass. For one wild moment, Eleanor considered it, running away with Adrian, building a life somewhere no one knew them, where she could be herself without judgment. Then she remembered the workers at the theater, the promise she'd made. No, she said, I'm seeing this through. Even if you lose everything. I've already lost everything I was supposed to care about. Reputation, social standing, marriage prospects. All that's left is what I actually care about. She squeezed his hands. The legislation matters, Adrian. Those people matter. I won't run. Then neither will I. He pulled her into his arms. Tomorrow we win or lose together. Friday morning dawned cold and gray. Eleanor dressed carefully, wearing blue, Adrian's color. Her mother was pale but silent. Rosalind hugged her tightly.
Whatever happens, Rosalind whispered, I'm proud of you. The parliamentary gallery was packed. Eleanor sat in the visitors section, flanked by Adrian's closest allies. Across the chamber, Edmund Ashford watched her with cold eyes. The debate raged for 3 hours. Members argued about economics, morality, the proper role of government. Eleanor's research was cited, questioned, defended. Her character was debated as if she weren't sitting right there. Finally, the speaker called for the vote. Eleanor gripped the railing in front of her, her knuckles white. Adrian stood in his place among the lords, his face unreadable. The votes were counted. The chamber fell silent. By a margin of 12 votes, the speaker announced, the factory reform legislation passes. The gallery erupted. Eleanor couldn't breathe. They'd won. Against every obstacle, every attack, every attempt to destroy them, they'd won. Adrian's eyes found hers across the chamber. He smiled, real and warm and full of promise. But Eleanor's triumph lasted exactly as long as it took Edmund Ashford to stand. A point of order, he called out, his voice carrying over the noise. The chamber quieted. While I accept the will of this body regarding the factory legislation, Edmund said smoothly, I must bring to attention a matter of public interest. It has come to my knowledge that Miss Eleanor Whitmore, whose research formed the basis of this legislation, has been conducting an inappropriate relationship with the Duke of Blackmore. Their association has violated every standard of proper conduct. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Furthermore, Edmund continued, I have evidence that suggests Miss Whitmore has been residing at the Duke's London residence without chaperone, engaging in behavior that's a lie. Adrian's voice cut through like a blade. Is it? I have testimony from servants, dates and times. Miss Whitmore leaving the Duke's residence at dawn, entering at night without proper supervision. Edmund's smile was vicious. Perhaps the Duke would like to explain these indiscretions to the chamber. The silence was absolute. Eleanor felt the world tilting. She'd been so careful. They'd always had chaperones, always observed propriety, except that one midnight conversation in the garden, except the morning she'd arrived unannounced after the first scandal broke. Small lapses that Edmund had documented and was now weaponizing. Adrian descended from his seat, moving to the center of the chamber. Every eye followed him. You're right, he said clearly. Miss Whitmore and I have conducted our association with insufficient regard for appearances. We've met privately to discuss legislation. She's been to my residence without formal supervision. By society's standards, we've been improper. Eleanor's heart stopped. He was confirming it, destroying both their reputations to, what? Save her? Damn her? She couldn't tell. However, Adrian continued, his voice ringing through the chamber, I reject the implication that there's been anything inappropriate in our conduct. Miss Whitmore is a woman of extraordinary integrity and intelligence. She's been my collaborator, my advisor, and my conscience throughout this process. If I've compromised her reputation by failing to observe every petty rule of social engagement, that's my failure, not hers. He turned to face Edmund directly. Itkim did. He turned to face. You've spent weeks trying to destroy Miss Whitmore because she threatened your political goals. You've lied about her character, fabricated evidence against her, and now you're attempting to shame her for behavior that wouldn't raise an eyebrow if she were a man. Adrian's voice went cold. I won't allow it. Your Grace, this is highly irregular, the speaker began. Then let me make it regular. Adrian's gaze swept the chamber before landing on Eleanor. I'm formally announcing my intention to marry Miss Eleanor Whitmore. The bans will be posted next week. Any questions about propriety can be answered by the fact that she'll be my duchess within the month. The chamber exploded, and Eleanor, sitting frozen in the gallery, felt the world shift irrevocably beneath her feet. He'd just proposed to her, in front of Parliament, in the most public, irrevocable way possible. She was going to kill him, or kiss him. She hadn't decided which. Eleanor barely remembered leaving the parliamentary gallery. One moment she was frozen in her seat, the next she was being escorted out by Adrian's secretary, while chaos erupted behind them. Shouts, arguments, the speaker banging his gavel, all of it faded to white noise. Adrian had just announced their engagement, in Parliament, without asking her first. She found him in a side corridor surrounded by allies and opponents, both demanding explanations. When he saw her, he dismissed them all with a curt gesture. Eleanor! She slapped him. The crack echoed in the suddenly empty hallway. Adrian's head snapped to the side, a red mark blooming on his cheek. You had no right, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. No right to decide my future without consulting me. No right to use marriage as a political weapon. No right to... He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or apologetic. It was desperate and claiming and full of every emotion neither of them had words for. When he finally pulled back, Eleanor was breathless and furious and dizzy. I'm sorry, Adrian said against her hair. I'm sorry. I panicked. Edmund was destroying you, and I couldn't think of any other way to stop him, and He pulled back to look at her. I told you I was going to ask. I just didn't plan to do it in front of 200 witnesses. You proposed to me in Parliament. Technically, I announced an engagement. The actual proposal is supposed to come with flowers and poetry, remember? Don't you dare joke about this. I'm not joking. Adrian's hands framed her face. Eleanor, I meant every word. I want to marry you, not to save your reputation, not for political advantage, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You should have asked me first. You're right, I should have. But would you have said yes in there? With Edmund watching, with everyone waiting to see you humiliated? His eyes searched hers. I took the choice away from you. I know that. And I'm sorry, but I'd do it again to protect you. Eleanor wanted to stay angry. She should stay angry. But underneath the fury was something else. Relief. Because Adrian had stood in front of Parliament and claimed her publicly. He'd made it impossible for anyone to attack her without attacking him. He'd chosen her. Irrevocably. You're an arrogant bastard, she said. I know.
And I should refuse you just to teach you a lesson about autonomy and respect. You probably should, but I won't. Eleanor took a shaky breath. Because you're right. I would have said yes, eventually, when you asked properly. Adrian's expression transformed. Is that a yes now? That's a we'll discuss this later when I'm not contemplating murder. She stepped back, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. What happens now, politically, I mean? Now we deal with the consequences. Adrian's face hardened. Edmund will claim I forced your hand, that the engagement proves inappropriate behavior. We'll need to counter that immediately. How? By being so boringly proper from this moment forward that no one can question it. He caught her hand. Also by destroying Edmund's credibility completely. I have investigators looking into his finances. If he's been taking bribes, and I'm almost certain he has, we'll expose him. Eleanor's mind was already working. The factory owners, the ones who oppose the legislation most vocally. If we can prove they paid Edmund to fight reform, then he's finished. Adrian's smile was sharp. And you, my brilliant almost duchess, have just identified our strategy. The next week was a carefully orchestrated performance. Adrian formally called on Eleanor's family to ask her father's permission. A conversation that lasted approximately 30 seconds before her father, reading the political winds, agreed enthusiastically. The engagement was announced in all the proper papers with all the proper wording, and Eleanor endured an endless parade of congratulations from people who'd been calling her unsuitable just days before. It's nauseating, she told Rosalind, who was helping her respond to the flood of letters. These same women who said I was a social climber are now praising my excellent match. That's society. Rosalind signed another acceptance card. They respect power, and you have Adrian's now. I don't want power through him. I want to be respected for your own accomplishments. I know. Rosalind looked up, her expression complicated. Eleanor, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy, truly? Or are you just relieved the fighting is over? Eleanor considered the question honestly. I don't know yet. Everything happened so fast. 3 months ago, I was invisible. Now I'm engaged to the Duke of Blackmore, and half of London either loves me or hates me. She paused. But when I'm with Adrian, when we're working together or arguing about something, or just sitting in companionable silence, yes, I'm happy. Then that's what matters. Rosalind hesitated. Eleanor, about the music teacher, what Adrian arranged. You're welcome, and you should marry him if you love him. Mother will never approve. Mother approved of me marrying Adrian once she realized the alternative was complete social ruin. She'll come around on your musician too. Eleanor squeezed her sister's hand. Besides, I'll be a duchess. I can make your marriage fashionable through sheer force of rank. Rosalind laughed, but her eyes were wet. I never thanked you properly for not backing down when Edmund threatened to expose us. You could have withdrawn your support for the legislation and saved me. You didn't. You're my sister, and you deserve to be happy, even if it's unconventional. Eleanor smiled. Also, I was fairly certain Adrian could fix it, which he did. So, really, you should thank him. I did. He was surprisingly understanding for a duke. He's surprisingly understanding for a human when you get past the intimidating exterior. The banns were posted. The wedding was scheduled for 4 weeks hence, fast by society standards, but Adrian insisted and Eleanor didn't argue. Every day they weren't married was another day for Edmund and his allies to create new scandals. Meanwhile, Adrian's investigators worked quietly. Eleanor helped where she could, using her research skills to track connections between factory owners and parliamentary votes. The pattern emerged slowly, money flowing from industrialists opposed to reform, through intermediaries, to Edmund Ashford's accounts. It's not quite proof, Adrian's solicitor said, reviewing the evidence. Everything is laundered through legitimate business transactions. But the timing is suggestive. Suggestive isn't enough, Eleanor said. We need something definitive. Then we set a trap, Adrian said. They crafted it carefully. A rumor was planted. The Duke was considering even more aggressive factory legislation, including mandated profit sharing with workers. It was deliberately inflammatory, designed to provoke a response. Edmund took the bait within 48 hours. He approached a factory owner named Whitmore, no relation to Eleanor, offering to block the new legislation for a fee. What Edmund didn't know was that Whitmore had already been approached by Adrian's people. The meeting was documented, recorded, witnessed by a magistrate. When Adrian presented the evidence to Parliament, Edmund's support collapsed overnight. The hearing was brutal. Edmund denied everything, claimed entrapment, accused Adrian of manufacturing evidence. But the documentation was ironclad. By the time the chamber voted to censure him, Edmund's political career was effectively over. Eleanor watched from the gallery, feeling none of the triumph she'd expected. Edmund Ashford was a bully and a fraud, but seeing him destroyed felt hollow. The man who'd tried so hard to ruin her was reduced to desperate denials and pointed accusations. "He's finished," Adrian said afterward, finding her in the same corridor where she'd slapped him weeks before. "Censured formally, under investigation for bribery. He'll likely face criminal charges." "Good." Eleanor said it because she was supposed to, but her voice lacked conviction. Adrian studied her carefully. "You're not happy yet." "I'm relieved. That's different." She leaned against the wall. Edmund was terrible, but he was also a symptom. There are dozens like him, people who see factory workers as expendable, who view reform as threatening their profits and power. We destroyed one man. That doesn't fix the system. No, Adrian agreed. But it's a start. The legislation passed. Edmund's downfall sends a message that opposing humane working conditions has consequences. And you, he smiled slightly, you've become something neither of us expected. What's that? A voice people actually listen to. The Chronicle wants a regular column from you on labor issues. 3 different ladies' societies have asked you to speak at their meetings. You're not just my radical fiancée anymore. You're Eleanor Whitmore, factory reform advocate, in your own right. Eleanor hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on survival, on winning the immediate battles, that she hadn't noticed the ground shifting beneath her. I don't know how to be a public figure. You'll learn. Same way you learned to navigate society despite being told you didn't belong. Adrian took her hand. But you don't have to do it alone. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The wedding preparations consumed the following weeks. Eleanor's mother transformed into a force of nature, organizing everything with military precision. Rosalind helped Eleanor choose a dress. Ivory silk, simple and elegant. Nothing like the elaborate confections most brides wore. You should wear what makes you feel like yourself, Rosalind said, watching Eleanor study her reflection. Even on your wedding day. Myself is usually covered in ink and research notes. Then wear a practical dress you can breathe in, one that won't require 4 maids to help you undress. Rosalind grinned. Though Adrian probably wouldn't mind helping with that part. Rosalind. Her sister laughed, unrepentant. The easy affection between them felt new and precious. For years they'd been cordial but distant, separated by their mother's favoritism and society's constant comparisons. Now preparing for Eleanor's wedding, they were actually becoming friends. I'm glad it's you marrying him, Rosalind said later, pinning Eleanor's hair experimentally. I know Mother always assumed I'd make the brilliant match, but you and Adrian actually suit each other. You challenge each other. That's rare. Most marriages aren't based on challenge. Most marriages are boring. Rosalind met Eleanor's eyes in the mirror. You get to build something different. Don't waste it trying to be the Duchess everyone expects. Eleanor thought about those words often in the days that followed. The Duchess everyone expected would be decorative and silent. She'd host parties and wear beautiful clothes and never express an opinion on anything important. That wasn't who Eleanor was. And she refused to become that person, even for a title. 3 days before the wedding, a package arrived. Eleanor opened it to find a leather-bound journal, the pages blank, and a note in Adrian's handwriting. For your thoughts, your research, your arguments that make me reconsider everything I thought I knew. Write the future you want to see, then we'll build it together. Eleanor traced the inscription on the journal's cover, her initials, intertwined with Adrian's, a promise of partnership, not possession. She started writing immediately. Ideas for expanding the factory legislation, proposals for educating workers' children, thoughts on women's property rights that she'd never dared voice publicly. By the time she finished, dawn was breaking and her hand ached. But the journal was half full of plans, dreams, arguments that would scandalize half of London if they ever became public. Good. Let them be scandalized. The wedding morning arrived gray and drizzly, which Eleanor's mother declared a disaster, and Eleanor privately thought was perfect. She wasn't the sunny, romantic type. Why should her wedding pretend otherwise? She dressed with Susan's help, pinning her hair simply and refusing the elaborate jewelry her mother tried to force on her. When she looked in the mirror, she saw herself, Eleanor Whitmore, about to become Eleanor Blackmore, still recognizable beneath the silken occasion.
"You look beautiful, miss," Susan said, tears in her eyes. "I look like myself in a fancy dress." Sometimes that's the same thing. The church was packed. Eleanor walked down the aisle on her father's arm, hyper-aware of every eye watching her. But when she saw Adrian waiting at the altar, everything else faded. He looked nervous. The great Duke of Blackmore, who faced down Parliament without flinching, was nervous about marrying her. Eleanor felt something warm unfurl in her chest. The ceremony was traditional, the vows unchanged for centuries. Eleanor spoke her promises clearly, meaning every word. When Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, simple gold, no ostentatious stones, his hand trembled slightly. "I love you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Eleanor's throat tightened. He'd never said it before, never put it into those simple, devastating words. "I love you too," she whispered back. Then the vicar was pronouncing them married, and Adrian was kissing her with thorough disregard for propriety, and the congregation was applauding because the scandalous engagement had finally been legitimized. Eleanor Whitmore was now the Duchess of Blackmore. The reception was held at Adrian's estate, her estate now, though that felt surreal. Eleanor moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, her hand firmly tucked into Adrian's arm. Lord Pemberton approached with genuine warmth. "Your Grace, may I say the Duke has made an excellent choice?" "You may," Eleanor said, "though I think I made the excellent choice. He's the one who got stuck with me and my radical politics." Pemberton laughed. "Those radical politics just passed Parliament. I'd say he got the better end of the bargain." Other guests were less enthusiastic, but politely civil. Lady Morrison offered stiff congratulations. The younger society women studied Eleanor with new calculation. She was a duchess now, which meant she had power they needed. Eleanor caught Rosalind watching her from across the room and smiled. Her sister smiled back, proud and slightly amused. Halfway through the reception, Adrian pulled Eleanor aside into a quiet study. "Escaping your own party?" she asked. "Our party, and yes, briefly. I have something for you." He produced a folder, the same kind they'd used for all their legislative research. Eleanor opened it curiously. Inside were documents transferring ownership of 3 textile mills into her name. "Adrian, what? They're yours, completely, to run however you see fit." He watched her face carefully. "You fought for better factory conditions. Now you can implement them directly. Prove that treating workers well is good business, not just good morality." Eleanor stared at the papers, her mind racing. "These are worth—" "A fortune, yes. Your fortune now." Adrian smiled slightly. "I know you didn't marry me for money, but you're my wife, and under law everything I own is yours anyway. I'm just making it official for properties where I want your specific involvement. You're giving me 3 factories. I'm giving you the means to change 3 factories worth of lives." He touched her cheek. "What you do with that is entirely your choice." Eleanor looked at the documents, at the trust and faith they represented, and felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm going to make them the best-run mills in England," she said. "I know. That's why I gave them to you." They returned to the reception together. Eleanor's mind was already spinning with plans. Ventilation improvements, reduced hours, education programs for workers' children. The legislation had been a start. This was the next step. When the reception finally ended and the guests departed, Eleanor found herself alone with Adrian in the vast estate that was now her home. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, looking at the portraits of previous duchesses lining the walls. "All of this? The title, the expectations, the responsibility? Then ignore the expectations." Adrian pulled her close. "Be the duchess you want to be, not the one they think you should be." "What if I fail? What if I'm terrible at this and—" "Then you'll fail spectacularly and try something different," he smiled. "Eleanor, You challenged parliamentary lords about factory economics when you were nobody.
You survived character assassination and social warfare. You helped pass legislation that will save lives. Being a duchess is nothing compared to what you've already done. Being your duchess, though... Eleanor looked up at him. That's different. That matters. Ooh. It matters because you matter, to me, to the people whose lives you're working to improve, to every woman watching you prove that intelligence and conviction matter more than perfect comportment. Eleanor kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and certain. I'm ready, she said. For what? All of it. The Duchess part, the factory reform part, the building a life together part. She smiled. Though I reserve the right to be terrified occasionally. I'll be terrified with you, Adrian promised. The next morning, Eleanor woke in her new home as the Duchess of Blackmore. She found Adrian already awake, reading through correspondence at the desk in their bedroom. There's a letter for you, he said, holding out an envelope. From the Chronicle, some. Eleanor opened it, scanning the contents quickly. Then she read it again, slower. They want me to write a weekly column, not just about factories, about women's education, property rights, social reform generally. She looked up. Adrian, this is exactly what you should be doing. He stood, crossing to her. You have a voice people will listen to now. Use it. Some people won't like what I have to say. Let them not like it. Eleanor, you didn't become a duchess to be silent. You became a duchess despite refusing to be silent. Don't stop now. Eleanor thought about the blank journal he'd given her, half filled with radical ideas. She thought about the 3 factories now under her control. She thought about the women at the theater who'd thanked her for noticing their suffering. I'll do it, she said, but I'm not tempering my opinions to be palatable. I would be disappointed if you did. The first column appeared 2 weeks later, arguing for women's right to own property independent of their husbands. The response was explosive, half outraged, half supportive, everyone with an opinion. Eleanor's mother nearly fainted when she read it. Eleanor, you're a duchess now. You can't just... I can, actually. That's the point of the title. Eleanor kept her voice gentle. Mother, I know this isn't what you imagined for me, but it's who I am, who I've always been. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. You're happy? Yes. And the Duke supports this madness? He encourages it. Her mother sighed. Then I suppose I'll have to adjust my expectations. Again. It wasn't quite approval, but it was acceptance. Eleanor would take it. The real turning point came 3 months after the wedding. Eleanor had implemented changes at her first factory. Better ventilation, shorter hours, a school for workers' children. Production costs rose initially, as expected. Then productivity increased, dramatically. Workers who weren't exhausted produced more. Children who attended school instead of working proved more valuable as they grew. The investment in better conditions paid for itself within months. Eleanor documented everything meticulously. When the data was undeniable, she published it. The article appeared in the Times alongside her regular Chronicle column. Proof of concept: how humane factory conditions improve profits. The numbers were specific, the methodology transparent, the conclusions irrefutable. Other factory owners took notice. Within weeks, Eleanor was receiving letters from mill managers asking for advice. Some were genuine believers in reform. Others just wanted the competitive advantage. Eleanor didn't care about their motivations as long as the result was better conditions for workers. She hired consultants, former workers who understood factory operations intimately, and sent them to assess facilities. The reports they brought back were often damning, but also actionable. Eleanor developed standardized recommendations, tiered by factory size and resources. Within 6 months, 17 factories had implemented her guidelines. Within a year, the number had grown to 43. You've started a movement, Adrian said one evening, reviewing the latest reports with her. I've proven that treating people decently is good business. The movement was always there. It just needed evidence. Don't diminish what you've done. Adrian set down the papers. Eleanor, you're changing how industry operates. That's not small. She thought about the woman at the theater, the one who'd thanked her for caring. She thought about the children now in schools instead of mills. She thought about workers writing to tell her the changes had saved their lives. It's not enough yet, she said, but it's a start. The social transformation was slower but equally significant. Eleanor had become someone society couldn't ignore, not because she was beautiful or charming, but because she was effective. Women who'd dismissed her now sought her advice. Men who'd patronized her now debated her seriously. The day she testified before a parliamentary committee about industrial conditions, Eleanor wore her plainest dress and spoke for 2 hours without notes. She cited data, quoted workers, and challenged assumptions with the same directness that had scandalized Lady Morrison months ago. When she finished, the committee chairman, a lord who'd opposed the original legislation, set down his pen. "Your Grace, I confess I came here prepared to disagree with you, but your arguments are compelling." "Thank you, my lord. Though I should note these aren't my arguments, they're evidence. I'm simply presenting it in a way that's difficult to dismiss." The committee voted to extend factory regulations to industries not covered by the original legislation. Eleanor walked out of Parliament that day and found Adrian waiting in the hallway with flowers. The promised bouquet he'd never given her when they got engaged. "What are these for?" "For being extraordinary." He handed her the bouquet, wildflowers again, like the first arrangement he'd sent. "And for proving that you didn't need me to give you power. You claimed it yourself." Eleanor buried her face in the flowers to hide sudden tears. "I couldn't have done any of this without you."
You could have. It would have been harder, taken longer, but you would have found a way. Adrian tilted her chin up. "I gave you a platform, Eleanor."
"But you're the one who stood on it and refused to be quiet." That night, writing her next column by lamplight while Adrian read beside her, Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago. The invisible daughter who believed love and recognition weren't meant for her. She'd been wrong about so much. Love had found her, not despite her intelligence and convictions, but because of them. Recognition had come, not from conforming to expectations, but from shattering them. And power, real power, had turned out to be nothing like she'd imagined. Power wasn't the title or the money or the social position. Power was knowing what you stood for and refusing to back down. Power was using every resource available to make the changes you believed in. Power was being so undeniably effective that even your enemies had to take you seriously. Eleanor Blackmore, Duchess of Blackmore, had power. And she was just getting started. 2 years passed in a blur of incremental victories and calculated battles. Eleanor's factories became models studied across England. Her weekly column evolved into a monthly journal that published research from other reformers. The school she'd established for workers' children expanded to include adult education, reading, writing, basic mathematics for people who'd never had the chance to learn. But success brought new enemies, more sophisticated ones. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a private courier. Eleanor was reviewing production reports when Adrian brought it to her, his expression grim. "It's from the Industrial Council." "Oh," he said. "Read it." Eleanor scanned the formal language, her stomach sinking with each line. The council, a coalition of factory owners and business interests, was filing a legal challenge against her reforms. They claimed her implementation of voluntary standards was creating unfair competitive advantages, that other factory owners were being forced to match her conditions or lose workers, which violated principles of free enterprise. "This is absurd," Eleanor said. "Voluntary improvements aren't illegal." "No, but they're arguing you're using your position as a duchess to pressure other owners. That workers are demanding changes because they see what's possible at your facilities, and that constitutes undue influence." Adrian's jaw was tight. "It's a clever argument, twisted, but clever." Eleanor read the letter again, seeing the trap. If she won, the council would claim aristocratic interference in commerce. If she lost, her reforms would be painted as illegal overreach, potentially invalidating everything she'd built. "They're forcing me to choose," she said slowly, "between the title and the work. Not necessarily. We can fight this legally. My solicitors will argue for months while the council spreads their narrative." Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. "Adrian, they don't need to win in court. They just need to make me toxic. Make other factory owners afraid to implement reforms because they'll be seen as caving to aristocratic pressure. Then what do you propose?" Eleanor stared out at the grounds, her mind working through possibilities. The answer came suddenly. terrifyingly clear. I give them what they claim to want. I remove the aristocratic influence entirely. Adrian went still. Explain. The council says I'm using my position as Duchess to pressure reform. Fine. I'll separate the position from the work. She turned to face him. I'll establish an independent organization, not affiliated with your title or mine, funded by the factory's profits, governed by a board that includes workers themselves. Make it about evidence and economics, not aristocracy.
Eleanor, that's radical, I know. She moved closer. But it's also honest. You gave me those factories to prove reform works. I've proven it. Now I make it sustainable without me at the center.
Show that better conditions aren't about one duchess playing at charity. They're about fundamental business sense. Adrian studied her for a long moment. You'd give up direct control?
August success. I'd give up the appearance of control. The organization would still implement my research, still push for improvements.
But it wouldn't be Eleanor Blackmore's pet project anymore. It would be a professional institution with credibility, independent of my title. The council will claim victory. They'll say they forced you to back down.
Let them. As long as the work continues, I don't care who gets credit.
Eleanor took his hands. Adrian, I learned something these past 2 years. Real change doesn't come from one person, no matter how powerful. It comes from systems that outlast individual effort. I want to build something that will still be improving lives long after I'm gone. Adrian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You're either brilliant or insane. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both? The announcement was carefully orchestrated. Eleanor held a press conference, a relatively new concept that scandalized traditionalists, at one of her factories. Workers stood alongside business managers. Financial records were made available for inspection, and Eleanor laid out her vision for the Industrial Reform Institute, an independent organization dedicated to proving and promoting humane working conditions. The factory owners funding the council's legal challenge were invited to join the institute's board. You're calling their bluff, Adrian murmured as they waited for the journalist to arrive. I'm forcing them to put principles over politics. If they refuse to join an organization dedicated to profitable reform, they admit profits aren't actually their concern. The
journalists came, dozens of them, from papers across England. Eleanor stood at a podium Adrian's staff had constructed, feeling the weight of every eye. Thank you for coming, she began.
I've asked you here today to announce a new venture, but first I need to address the legal challenge filed by the Industrial Council. She pulled out the council's letter, reading the key accusations aloud. Several factory owners in attendance shifted uncomfortably. The council claims I'm using aristocratic influence to unfairly pressure reform. They may be right. Eleanor paused, letting that sink in. Not about the unfairness. My factory's success proves the reforms work economically. But about influence? Perhaps. My title opens doors that remain closed to workers, to managers without noble connections, to anyone who lacks aristocratic privilege. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. So I'm removing that advantage. Today I'm announcing the formation of the Industrial Reform Institute, an independent organization that will research, promote, and assist in implementing humane working conditions. The institute will be funded by profits from reformed factories. Its board will include factory owners, workers, economists, and physicians. Not duchesses, She looked directly at the council members present. I'm inviting the Industrial Council to join this effort. Put your expertise toward proving whether reform is profitable or not. Let evidence decide, not titles or politics. One of the council members, a gruff industrialist named Hammond, stood. And if we prove reform isn't profitable, what then? Then you'll have evidence, which is more than you have now. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. But I don't think you'll prove that, Mr. Hammond. I think you'll find what I found, that treating workers decently costs less than replacing sick and injured ones, that education creates more valuable employees, that safe conditions reduce costly accidents. Pretty theories from someone who can afford to experiment. Not theories, data. Eleanor gestured to the workers beside her. These people work in my factories. Ask them if conditions have improved. Ask them if they're more productive. Then look at the financial records I've made available and see if those improvements destroyed profits or increased them." Hammond looked uncomfortable. He glanced at his council colleagues, clearly weighing options. Another council member, a woman named Mrs. Thornton who owned textile mills in Manchester, stood slowly. "I'll join your board, Your Grace, on one condition. Name it. You publish everything. All your research, all your data, all your methods. No proprietary advantage. If this works, every factory in England should have access to the information." Eleanor felt Adrian tense beside her. Her competitive advantage, the thing that made her factories uniquely successful, was the comprehensive research and implementation strategy she'd developed. Giving it away freely meant losing that edge. It also meant the reforms could spread faster than she'd ever achieve alone. "Agreed," Eleanor said. "Everything will be public. Free access for any factory owner who wants it." Mrs. Thornton smiled, sharp and approving. "Then you have my support, Your Grace, and my factories as test cases." Over the next hour, 3 more council members joined the Institute. Others remained skeptical but agreed to review the evidence before proceeding with legal challenges. By the time the journalists left, Eleanor had transformed a hostile legal threat into something that looked almost like collaboration. Almost. That evening, Adrian found Eleanor in the study they shared, staring at the plans for the Institute. "You gave away everything," he said quietly. "I gave away the research, not the mission." Eleanor looked up. Was it the wrong choice? "I don't know yet." Adrian sat beside her. "But it was a bold one. You essentially made yourself obsolete." "Good. The work shouldn't depend on me." She leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. "Adrian, what if this fails? What if the Institute can't sustain itself without aristocratic backing? What if I just destroyed everything we built?" "Then we'll build something else." His arm came around her shoulders. "Eleanor, you've spent 2 years proving reform works. That evidence doesn't disappear because you changed organizational structure. And you—" He tilted her face up. "You just showed every industrialist in England that you're more committed to improving workers' lives than to personal credit or power. That matters. Or I showed them I'm naive and exploitable. Some will think that. Others will remember this moment when the Institute succeeds without you at the helm, when it proves the reforms work regardless of who implements them." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her through the following weeks as the Institute took shape. She'd appointed a director, a former factory manager with impeccable credentials and no aristocratic connections. The board convened, mixing council members with workers and academics. Eleanor attended as an advisor, nothing more. Watching someone else lead the organization she'd conceived felt like losing a limb. "You're hovering," Adrian said one evening, finding her reading the Institute's latest report for the 3rd time. "I'm observing. You're micromanaging from a distance, which is worse than direct micromanaging." He took the report away. "Eleanor, you chose to step back. Let them work. What if they make mistakes? Then they'll learn from them, like you did." Adrian pulled her to her feet. "Come with me. I have something to show you." "Okay." He led her to the estate's library, a room she'd practically lived in during their engagement. But now it was transformed. The walls were lined with new bookcases, filled with journals and research papers. A large table dominated the center, covered with correspondence. "What is this?" "Your new project." Adrian gestured to the letters. "These are requests you've received over the past 6 months. Speaking invitations, requests for advice on education reform, women's property rights, workers' suffrage, things you haven't had time to address because you've been running factories." Eleanor picked up a letter at random. It was from a group of women in Birmingham asking for help establishing a school for working-class girls. "There are hundreds of these," Adrian continued. "Issues beyond industrial reform where your voice and expertise could make a difference. But you can't address them if you're still trying to control every detail of factory management." Eleanor read through more letters. A physician wanted to discuss maternal mortality rates. A solicitor needed help drafting legislation on married women's property. A teacher was seeking funding for a lending library in a poor neighborhood. Each letter represented someone who thought Eleanor Whitmore,
Not the Duchess of Blackmore, but Eleanor herself might help. "I can't do all of this," she said. "No, but you can do some of it, the most important parts. The things only you can address." Adrian moved behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "Eleanor, you created the Institute so factory reform could continue without you. Now actually let it continue without you. Trust the systems you built and move on to the next battle." Eleanor looked at the letters. At the library, Adrian had transformed into a workspace for her. At the future stretching beyond factories and production numbers. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if the Institute fails without me? What if it succeeds better than it would have with you? What if removing yourself from the center actually makes it stronger?" Eleanor thought about Mrs. Thornton joining the board, about workers serving as advisors, about the council members who'd agreed to evaluate evidence rather than file lawsuits. None of that would have happened if she'd remained firmly in control. Her stepping back had created space for others to step forward. "I hate that you're right," she said. Adrian laughed. "You'll survive the humiliation." What Over the next year, Eleanor discovered Adrian had been right about more than the Institute. Without daily factory management consuming her time, she turned attention to the letters. She started small, funding the Birmingham School, advising on property legislation, writing recommendations for lending libraries. Each project connected her with new allies. The women running schools introduced her to education reformers. The property rights solicitors brought her into legal circles. The library advocates connected her with literacy organizations. Eleanor's influence expanded beyond industry, beyond the careful boundaries she'd initially set. And because she wasn't controlling these initiatives directly, just supporting, advising, funding, they grew in directions she never would have anticipated. The Birmingham School became a network of 5 schools. The property legislation passed Parliament with amendments Eleanor had suggested. The lending library spawned 12 sister institutions across working-class neighborhoods. Meanwhile, the Industrial Reform Institute thrived. The director Eleanor had appointed proved brilliant at building coalitions. Council members who'd initially joined skeptically became genuine advocates as evidence accumulated. Worker advisors brought perspectives that improved recommendations beyond what Eleanor had achieved alone. 6 months after its founding, the Institute published its first comprehensive report, Factory Reforms Implemented at 47 Facilities, with measurable improvements in both worker welfare and profitability. The data was irrefutable, the methodology transparent, the conclusions devastating to anyone claiming humane conditions were economically unfeasible. Eleanor read the report in her library, surrounded by letters requesting her help on education, property rights, suffrage, and a dozen other causes. She'd stopped being the center of factory reform, and factory reform had become stronger for it. The moment of true reckoning came at Parliament's annual Industrial Policy Review. Eleanor attended in the gallery, no longer testifying but observing as the Institute's director presented 2 years of evidence. Lord Hammond, the industrialist who'd challenged her so aggressively, stood to speak. Eleanor braced for opposition. "I confess I opposed the Institute initially," Hammond said. "I believed the Duchess of Blackmore was using her position to impose impractical idealism on practical business. I was wrong." The chamber went silent. "The evidence is undeniable. Factories implementing Institute recommendations show measurable profit increases. Worker productivity rises. Accident rates fall. Even accounting for implementation costs, the return on investment is significant." Hammond paused. "I've implemented these reforms at my own facilities. My competitors thought I was mad. My profits this year are up 17%. Murmurs filled the chamber. "I move that Parliament formally recognize the Institute's work and encourage nationwide adoption of their standards. Not through mandate, through evidence. Let every factory owner see what I've seen. Better conditions are better business." The motion passed overwhelmingly. Eleanor sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face, as Parliament endorsed the work she'd started in Adrian's study 2 years ago. The work she'd nearly abandoned when Edmund Ashford tried to destroy her. The work she'd thought would end when she stepped back from direct control. It hadn't ended. It had multiplied. That evening, Eleanor found Adrian on the estate's terrace, looking out over grounds that had become as familiar as breathing. "Hammond gave you credit," Adrian said without turning. "In his speech, He specifically mentioned your original research. I heard. You're not celebrating.
Eleanor joined him at the railing. I'm thinking about that first night at the Ashford ball, when you asked me to dance and everyone thought you'd made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake.
No, but I thought I was so small then, so invisible. I thought if I just stayed quiet, stayed in my place, the world would be kinder to me.
She laughed softly. I was an idiot. You were surviving the only way you knew how. Maybe, but Adrian, everything I am now, everything I've built, happened because I stopped trying to be invisible, because I decided being seen, even being attacked, was better than disappearing. Adrian pulled her close. You were never going to disappear. You're too stubborn. I'm not done, you know. The factories are just the beginning. Eleanor gestured to the estate. There are schools to build, laws to change, women who need to hear that intelligence matters more than beauty, children who deserve education regardless of their parents' wealth. I know. I married a revolutionary, not a duchess. You married both. Lucky you. Adrian kissed her, slow and thorough and full of promises neither of them had words for. When he pulled back, his eyes held the same intensity that had first caught Eleanor's attention. What? She asked. I'm proud of you, for building something bigger than yourself, for having the courage to step back when you could have held on to control, for becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. Eleanor felt tears threaten again. I couldn't have done any of it without you.
Yes, you could have. It would have been harder, taken longer, but you would have found a way. Adrian touched her face gently.
I just gave you a platform and tried not to fall off while you changed the world standing on it. Bish Geekox. 5 years after that first dance at the Ashford ball, Eleanor stood before an audience of 300 women at the inaugural meeting of the Women's Educational Alliance. She wore a simple dress, elegant but not ostentatious. Her notes were minimal. She'd learned to trust her voice without extensive preparation. Thank you for coming, she began. I've been asked to speak about how I became involved in reform work, how I found my voice in spaces that traditionally excluded women. The truth is simpler than you might think. I stopped believing I needed permission to have opinions. Laughter rippled through the audience. I know that sounds obvious, but most of us are taught from childhood that our value lies in being agreeable, decorative, silent on matters of substance. We're told intelligence in women is unwomanly, that ambition is unseemly, that we should be satisfied with whatever space men decide to give us. Eleanor paused, looking at the faces watching her. Young women and old, working class and aristocratic. All of them here because they wanted more than the world had offered them. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Your intelligence isn't unwomanly, it's human. Your ambitions aren't unseemly, they're necessary. And you don't need anyone's permission to claim space in conversations about your own lives. She spoke for an hour about factory reform, education, property rights, about failures and victories, allies and enemies, about the difference between power given and power claimed. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, women crowded around her with questions, stories, requests for advice. Eleanor spoke with each one, recognizing herself in their frustration and determination. One young woman, barely 20, plainly dressed, waited until the crowd thinned. Your Grace, I read your columns, all of them. I want to be like you. Eleanor smiled. Don't be like me. Be like yourself, but louder. Bon sang. I don't know how. Start small. Write a letter. Attend a meeting. Speak up when something feels wrong, even if your voice shakes. Eleanor took the girl's hand. I was terrified every single time I did something people said I shouldn't, but I did it anyway. You can too. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Watching her leave, Eleanor thought about the invisible daughter she'd been, the girl who'd hidden in libraries and believed she was meant to disappear. That girl was gone. Not erased, but transformed, built into something stronger through every battle, every failure, every small victory. Eleanor Blackmore, Duchess of Blackmore, was no longer invisible. But more importantly, she'd helped make other invisible women visible too. And that work, that endless, exhausting, essential work, would continue long after she was gone. That evening, Eleanor found Adrian in their private study, reading through her latest draft legislation on workers' education. "This is good," he said, making notes in the margins. "But Parliament will balk at mandatory funding. You need a voluntary framework that creates incentives, like we did with factory standards." "Exactly." He looked up. "You're learning to play the long game. Eleanor settled beside him, reviewing his suggested changes. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally debating a point or sharing a new idea. This was marriage, Eleanor had learned. Not constant romance or passionate declarations, but partnership. Two people building something together that neither could create alone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me instead of someone easier? Someone who would have been content to host parties and look decorative?" Adrian set down his pen. "Not once. Not even when you're impossibly stubborn, or when your latest project scandalized half of Parliament. I'm going to keep scandalizing them. You know that. I'm counting on it." He pulled her close. "Eleanor, I didn't marry you to make my life easier. I married you to make my life matter. Everything we've built together, the factories, the institute, the legislation, the schools, that's our legacy. Not titles or estates, real change that will outlive us both." Eleanor kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said, "for seeing me when no one else did, for standing beside me when it would have been easier to step back, for building this life with me." "I love you too, for being brave enough to be yourself when the world wanted you to be someone else, for refusing to stay small, for showing me what partnership actually means." They returned to work, side by side, as moonlight streamed through the windows. Two people who'd found each other across a ballroom full of expectations and obligations, who'd chosen partnership over convenience, substance over appearance, truth over reputation. Outside, the world continued turning. Factories operated under improved conditions. Children attended schools that hadn't existed 3 years ago. Women read Eleanor's columns and thought maybe, just maybe, they could claim space too. And in the Blackmore Estate Library, Eleanor Whitmore wrote the next chapter of reforms that would reshape England's industrial landscape, her husband beside her, their future unfolding word by careful word. She was no longer the invisible daughter. She was the woman who'd refused to disappear, and in refusing, she'd changed everything.